This episode of the Codpast has been sponsored by dyslexic.com. With a wide range of assistive hardware, software and digital downloads, dyslexic.com has long been the home for all your assistive tech needs. For training, tech support and sales, when you think assistive tech, think dyslexic.com.
The Codpast.
Hello and welcome to the Codpast. I'm your host Sean Douglas, and this is the place where you'll hear right brain stories from interesting individuals. Today's guest is an author, a broadcaster, an award-winning performance poet whose live shows have been described as spellbinding and infused with humour and humanity, mixing wistful with the downright comic to take audiences on an incredible emotional journey, and a riot of cheek, giggles, boobs, tears and Facebook. Today's guest is performance poet Luke Wright. Welcome to the show, Luke.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. Nice to be here.
So what was quite interesting about getting you on the show is when I first approached you, you kind of said to me, well, I'm not quite sure if I fit the Codpast mould. I'm dyslexic, but it doesn't really bother me.
No, it hasn't really. I mean, I was told I was dyslexic when I was 10. I was perhaps not doing as well in reading and spelling. Certainly my handwriting was always terrible. They thought that was strange. It didn't really fit with how well I was doing everything else. And I had to do all these little, exercises and tests and stuff like that. And they told me I was dyslexic afterwards. And then that meant I went to, I had some extra help before school. I went to school early, sort of 2-3 mornings a week. It just sort of seemed a bit weird me being there. And I didn't feel like it was making a difference. And it bored me. And so I just said I didn't want to do it anymore. And I got quite stubborn. So I didn't want to come on here and be a fraud, basically.
But I mean, for me, that's kind of in some ways more interesting than having someone that goes, I really struggle, because dyslexia is always framed as a disability, something that stops you doing stuff. And to have someone who's dyslexic and successful and says dyslexia isn't a problem only means it could have been a positive. Through talking to you and reading some of your stuff and listening to some of the things you say, I actually see a lot of dyslexic traits that you have. Which
Tell me what they are. That's interesting.
Well, I mean, first of all, the school I went to, you could show your alpha maleness by being good at basketball or being good at running. Your school, it was kind of the opposite. It was like, who's best at doing tests and who's going to go to grammar school and stuff. So it was quite...
There was that there. Certainly in the last year of the secondary primary school I went to, they really honed you for grammar school and being top, and that was great at that school. But then all the clever kids left to go to grammar school, and I won 2 subject prizes that year. I was the only person to win a subject prize and not pass 11 plus. And then it was very different, I think, when I went to secondary school. Like I still wanted to do that. I was really competitive, but it wasn't a cool thing, And I got the piss taken out of me quite a lot for that. Yeah. I've been told by my teachers it was dyslexia that stopped me from passing 11 plus. That I could do the English and math stuff really well, but when it got to the verbal reasoning, my brain doesn't work in that way. That's what people told me. It seems strange that I would have aced like 2/3 of the exam and just totally flopped entirely on the other. I really wanted to pass that 11 plus and I didn't. And I think it really knocked my confidence and gave me a bit of stigma that I didn't. I think I would have done well at grammar school, surrounded by lots of other clever people. I would have liked that. All of my friends from that last year, they all passed, or pretty much all of them passed. Yeah, it felt very disappointing to be left behind at 11. But then if I'd done that, then maybe I would have, it taught me about failure in inverted commas in a way, because I've been top of the class, and then I went from being top of the class, even when I was moved up a year, to the last year just not doing so well. Like the other kids have kind of matured a bit more than me, and so I didn't do so. For the first time I didn't do well, and I sort of came near the bottom of some of the exams. And then there was the failing the 11 plus, and I don't know. I think that sort of stuff gave me, and it creates new paths in your mind, and you start to accept. You go, well, it's okay to fail. You don't think I'm a guy who doesn't fail. You think, oh, sometimes I fail, and that's fine. Or sometimes I slack off, or sometimes I'm not top. And I think that's so. I wonder if I'd passed that 11 plus, if I'd gone off to grammar school, I might have been on this sort of hot housing kind of must succeed, must get to Oxford, must get to Cambridge kind of thing. So I was told at college, at A level, they're like, yeah, you could go to Cambridge or Oxford, but you're going to need to work harder than you are doing right now. And I thought, nah, I don't want to do that. and you know what? 8-year-old me would never have thought that. 8-year-old me would be like, I'm going to work really, really hard and do that. And so actually, I think failing the 11 plus, which I do believe is a direct result of my dyslexia, did me a lot of good in a way, because it taught me that it's okay to just not win all the time, and I think, that kind of, that's vital, isn't it? So number one, to get through life, but also not be a total dick, like only dicks want to win all the time. Like that's just too much. And because in order to win all the time, you start doing unscrupulous things in order to do that. So yeah, I think, definitely there is part of me that was sort of shaped by not winning on that particular occasion, and I think it's probably been good for me in the long run.
In some ways, dyslexia, rather than being a hindrance or an advantage, it seems like it's been a little bit of a rudder to kind of guide you into certain direction. And like you said, you were very good at English, but you didn't do it like everyone else. You didn't use phonics, and you didn't learn these rules that you could go, well, I've got these rules, now I can apply them to these sounds. You remembered words.
Yeah, I memorised words. I learned by rote. But then I think a lot of kids learned by rote back then, because phonics wasn't a thing back then. And we're having all this with my eldest son now, because phonics makes no sense to him at all. So I guess, and also I know from poetry, I chose to learn my poems because I'm not good at reading my poems. So you said to me earlier on, but I'm going to mess up this introduction. You said to me, I said, that sounds familiar. I'm bad, when I'm reading stuff out loud. I read stories to my kids every night, and I probably make 2 or 3 mistakes. And really, I shouldn't be making mistakes at all, because I am a professional at reading stuff out loud. But actually, I've learned my poems right from gig number 1, because it was easier to. And I think you always can give better performances if you learn them. I think you can, so I kind of had to.
Yeah, and I think that's where it becomes a positive, because again, you couldn't do things the way that most poets do. That poetry is a lot of it is reading. It's standing up and reading your poems, and because that was difficult, you then actually had to do what's harder, which is learn them. Yeah. But putting in that hard work at the start allowed you to then actually perform them and actually bring life to them.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. But perhaps I would have done that anyway. I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard to say what would have. It's hard to say any of it, because I guess it's so integral to the way that I think and work, and I don't really notice the bits that. I mean, that's why I said it was fascinating when you said, "Oh, I can notice dyslexic traits," and so I was like, "Oh, really? What are they?"
But I think it is one of those difficult things, because dyslexia is you. You can't unpick what's dyslexic and what's not. But a lot of the time, you will take the easiest path. Yeah. And so actually, if the easiest path is just reading stuff, you'll take it. Yeah. Whereas with dyslexia, you have to build muscles that you wouldn't normally build, because actually there's no option.
Well, that's why I wonder why, I certainly feel now, sort of 20 years into doing this, almost 20 years into doing performance poetry, that my memory for remembering poems is better now than it was when I was 18. But I think similarly, my memory in the first place for remembering poems is probably quite good, because I've been teaching myself how to remember words that whole time. So almost certainly I probably had a head start on that.
And I mean, did you like poetry from the start? Because I never got on with poetry. And it's funny, we had Michael Fabry on last time, and he's a stand-up comedian who does a bit about dyslexia. And he talked about, when a lot of the poems you learn at school, they start off kind of tangible, they talk about a daffodil floating in the wind, and then by verse 3 it's about sandbags dipped in honey being kissed by angels, and you're just like, I don't even know what it's talking about.
Well, that just sounds like overwritten poetry. Did I like poetry at school? Yeah, I liked some of the war poetry. I thought that was quite good. I think I sort of made a connection with these words meaning something, and the sort of the beauty of them as well, and the sound of them, definitely. So the sound is something that I really love in poetry. The sonics of poetry. I think poetry's got to sound great, but I wasn't excited by it because it wasn't speaking about anything I cared about. And I think that's the thing. The sound of poetry, it can only be half of it. Content is king. It's got to be about something you care about. And then once I heard lyrics, I guess, so listening to Damon Albarn and Jarvis Cocker, I really liked those, and I started writing lyrics. And then a few years later, I saw John Cooper Clarke and Martin Newell doing performance poetry, and that just seemed perfect, because actually I realised the thing I loved best about a lot of this music was the lyrics. And there was a real... And I didn't just love it as a format to watch. I immediately thought, I want to do this. I could do this. I could get rid of that band that don't want to come to band practice, because I was always way more keen than everybody else.
Because that was your thing, because you were kind of doing poetry before you realised you were a poet. You were writing lyrics. And
I was writing lyrics to songs that didn't exist, and then I started putting music to those songs, and I was in a band. But I always kind of knew that music wasn't the right thing for me, because I wasn't really very musical, and I couldn't sing, and so I needed someone to sing my words for me. And that's always, that's you've got a very strong relationship with the person who's singing your words for you. You've got to find someone who's a good singer who doesn't want to sing their own words. So I always kind of knew the odds were stacked against me in music. But the other thing about me at 16 was I was really determined. Like, I was really ambitious, and I guess that's the same thing that made me competitive. Like, I at 16 wanted to get a band together and, you know, get a record deal and do all that. I didn't just think, oh, this is fun. You know, I really wanted to be successful. And so I think, yeah, I would have been on stage on my own. Could I sing? You know, I would have just got my guitar and gone it alone. And seeing these performance poets, I was like, oh, I could do that. And there was something very attractive about the immediacy of it. I could write something in the morning and perform it that afternoon without having to worry about rehearsing it with a whole bunch of other people and all that. And I like that. I like that autonomy it gave me.
What was it that really grabbed you though? Because you saw these people and they were doing words and being clever with them.
It was just so clever. It was just, I just loved the neatness of those great one-liner, you know, just simple stuff. Some of it was silly, some of it was serious, but you know, it was just so clever. It was so articulate. And I think that was what attracted me. I thought, God, I'd love to sound that articulate, and that might well be like tied up with being dyslexic. You know, my words get muddled as I talk. I'm not great off the cuff, and writing seemed like a way of making yourself sound really clever.
So, I mean, how did you become a professional poet? Because you saw these guys performing. I mean, who was it that you first saw that really turned you on to?
I guess it was Martin Newell and John Cooper Clarke particularly, but also Ross Sutherland, who's you know, pretty much a contemporary of mine. He's a couple of years older than me, and he was doing one of his first gigs. I thought, well, I could do that. So seeing those guys do it, they really excited me, and within a month I was doing a gig with Ross. You know, I went home and I wrote a poem a day for a month, and I blagged my way on to do a gig with him, and we started seriously going for it. And we put together this collective called Aisle 16, which is what we put on a night called Aisle 16, and we invited other poets to come down. It was mainly a chance where we could do longer sets, and then the regulars at this night became the residents of this night, which then became like a collective, and we used to go off and do gigs. And so we went to the Edinburgh Festival 2002, but we also went to Glastonbury that year, and then it felt all of a sudden we were kind of on a sort of semi-professional sort of stage, and it took maybe another couple of years after that to string together enough work. And I thought it wasn't possible. I thought, you know, all my role models were from a generation way above me. John Cooper Clarke, Martin Newell, these guys are old as my parents. All of them had sort of had records out, you know, had sort of done something with music, and I thought that's what you had to do. I thought there wasn't really any jobs in poetry, because I just didn't know enough about it. And it's these days, I think the scene is quite accessible and quite open, and I think the internet really helps with that. That wasn't the case back then. We were, you know, 20-year-olds. There was no other 20-year-olds. I think there was Jenny Lindsay in Scotland and me and Ross, you know, and our mates in Norwich. And that was it. Everyone else was a good sort of 5-10 years older than us. And it wasn't until I was 24 that I saw someone younger than me doing poetry at night. That was quite surprising.
And it's interesting in a way. It's kind of come full circle, because I was talking about these poems that kind of about flowers and leaves bellowing in the wind. And now I think you said to me, some guy came up to you and said, well, I think poetry's boring because it has to be about issues, and it has to be about racism.
A kid said that, yeah. A kid said he said, Miss, I like that part. I thought poetry would be about boring things like racism and issues. And yeah, but I mean, I think but that's the way poetry's taught in schools, though. You know, there is one of those, some of the syllable, you know, that they use poetry to teach analytical skills and to teach, you know, about issues, really. Like a lot of those poems are about big issues, like war and race and those sort of things. And and also the kids are taught to read these poems about serious issues and then analyse them. It's funny, isn't it? Because kids at junior school are taught fun, rhyming, silly poetry, and then no one mentions the word poetry for 3 years, and in year 9 they get handed an anthology, or even in year 10 they get handed an anthology, and all of a sudden it makes no sense to them, and it's deadly serious. And a lot of that joy is stripped out of it.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that I really liked when I first saw your poetry. I saw you back years ago at Book Slam.
Right, yeah.
And the poetry, a lot of the poetry is great and I love it, but it is about big issues, or it is kind of a bit intense. And I think the first poem I heard by you was Ode to Cigarettes, I think it was.
Right, yeah.
And it was brilliant, because a lot of my friends were like, why do you like poetry and stuff? And I saw that and I just started playing it to them. I was like, this is what poetry is about. And I sometimes call you the Arctic Monkey of poetry, because your lyrics were like the Arctic Monkeys. It's kind of like just the stuff that we talk about when we're hanging out outside college.
Yeah.
And that was that, because it was poetry, but it was almost a stand-up comedy bit.
Yeah. I think the stuff was, I did used to write stuff that felt like a bit. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I could have taken all that, and I did do the stand-up circuit for a bit, but I could have taken a lot of those things and put them into taken out of meter and rhyme. It's funny you should mention the Arctic Monkeys, because they are influenced by John Cooper Clarke. I mean, Alex Turner's biggest influence, to the point where he's got a tattoo on his arm that says John Cooper Clarke and the date where he first saw him. Wow. Now, I know John Cooper Clarke, and we've agreed, John and I, that that'd be creepy if I did something like that. You don't tattoo your mate's name on your arm. It's weird. But we're both influenced, and that's what John did. He wrote about the everyday. But all the best poets write about the everyday. It's not an unusual thing, I think.
And the reason I say dyslexia is kind of a rudder that's kind of given you direction is one thing you talked about before was the way that you use poetry, and you talked a little about before using meter and stuff, and almost giving yourself those restrictions is a spur for your creativity.
Definitely. Well, and that's the whole point of constraint, I think, is that it forces you to say things in succinct but also sort of not obvious ways. You can't just say exactly the first thing that comes into your head when you are writing in type, meter and rhyme. You've got to make it all work with everything else, so it forces you to say things. So it helps with my imagination. I can never be a surreal poet. I can start to get towards that when I'm forcing myself to say things in strange ways, because the constraint of the work has forced me to do it. So I use it massively to help me be more interesting, and also it allows you to be. It makes everything sound better, and it allows you to be sort of more clever as well. I said I like how clever everything was. Well, when you put stuff in meter and rhyme and still are able to say things succinctly, then it sounds all the more clever. It has that, and I do often read poems, and I'm wowed by the technical prowess, and I like to sort of try and bring that into my work. It helps for me. It helps create order, and I like order. I like imposing order on things.
Very dyslexic.
Is that very dyslexic? Is it? Yeah, I do. I like imposing order on things, but I always think that's kind of a very anti-artistic thing, really, trying to impose order on things. I think some people, or people who believe art should be this great, crazy, all over the place kind of thing. And for me, it's the opposite. It's about taking ideas and sort of trying to express them and then impose that order on them.
I mean, what do you think you would have been if you weren't a poet?
I don't know. I think I was thinking I'd be a journalist. That's what I wanted to be. But I felt there was too much. I was difficult, and I couldn't try and be a journalist and try and be a poet at the same time. Yeah.
See, I think you would have been a businessman of some kind, because like you write and you do books and all of that, but essentially what you are is an entrepreneur. Because I watched a video of yours, and you do talk about your poems as a product that you need to diversify, and yourself as a brand that you need to market.
Just saying that makes me feel a bit sick. I did couch all that in that video by saying this makes me feel a bit gross to talk about this. I was just trying to, that video, as I said, it's a TEDx talk that I gave to some students, but the theme was DIY art, but being a DIY artist, which is something I sort of believe really passionately in. Like, I've really enjoyed putting together my career, and I think if you are out there trying to earn money from your art, you need to understand how the finances of that works. I mean, I didn't understand when I started. I just thought, well, we'll do some stuff and maybe I'll get some money for some gigs, and I didn't really think very deeply about it. But as you get older, you need to realise what it is you're selling, and I think a lot of artists don't like to think about themselves as selling, because of course it feels a bit icky and stuff like that. But the reality is you do have something to offer, and you do want some people to give you some money for it in order for you to be able to concentrate on making more art.
Yeah, and I think that is a thing when it comes to art. Trying to make a living and selling your product is almost seen as unethical. But I think in your case, sometimes it helped your creative process, because I think in that video you said you realized there was 4 ways to make a living, and you were doing open mics, and you realized they weren't playing, and that was what spurred you to create a one-man show. In a way. Well, I wanted to be able to do it. I love writing poetry more than anything else, and I really like performing it in a different way. So I love writing it because it's really wholesome and great to have created something. It feels really sort of like a really good use of your time. And performing it doesn't. Performing it's like a little treat, So it's like it's like writing something's like eating a really healthy, beautiful, tasty meal, and performing it is like just performing it's like getting pissed. And I love both of those things, and I love the balance of that. In order to be able to do that at all times, I also have to be sensible and make sure I've got gigs
to do it at and get paid. I mean, it's not because I want to be like rich or anything like that. No one goes into poetry because I want to be rich. I want to just be able to survive so I can carry on doing the thing that I love doing best. And so, and also, like, I think earlier on, it wasn't just about money as much as sort of getting stage time.
Yeah.
Being able to actually do what it is you do, because I don't get to do what I do every day. I mean, I can write every day. I could write every day. I don't. You gigging, you don't do loads of gigs. I was doing like one gig a month when I was starting out, and that wasn't enough. I wanted to do loads more gigs than that. So in order to do more gigs, I had to be more in demand. So I had to sort of write better work. And so, the two things will go hand in hand.
Yeah. And again, that's quite dyslexic, entrepreneurial. Now, a lot of dyslexic are entrepreneurial, and it's because there isn't kind of this off the shelf career that you can have or job. You kind of have to chisel out a Luke Wright
and poetry particularly, there isn't. I mean, like stand up, there's a bit of a sort of ladder and there is career paths. It's less so, and then more so in poetry now, but certainly back then there wasn't. I mean, you had to sort of invent your own way through it. But that's definitely true. I would hate to be in an office trying to do the admin stuff and the forms, and my ability to read forms is really bad, given my ability to read complicated literature, like I can handle that, but give me a form and it's because I can't be asked to read it, or I start, and it just sort of, I hate all that stuff and all the sort of crap I had to do when I was temping. Like, I was bad at it. But yeah, I've been so good at school. Do you know what I mean? I really, I excelled academically, but like, give me like those forms to fill in and all that sort of stuff. I just don't. It's just not something I do well at, and it's just not something I take pride in. And so I think, actually, do you know what? I think I would, away from writing creatively, I think I would have done a job that required very little writing. Actually. I would have done well with a job that involves talking to people and ringing them up and convincing them to do things and putting on. That's why I think programming events makes sense. It's to me, I can just often when I do program events, I can't even be bothered to write the emails out to send them.
Yeah.
And that might be because I've spent best part of 20 years having living the life of Riley doing poetry, but I'd much rather just ring somebody up and explain the idea of the gig to them rather than trying to write it all down. So unless I'm writing poems, I find the task of writing frustrating and irritating.
Totally dyslexic.
Yeah.
Because I'm the same. I can write scripts and stuff. Trying to write a one paragraph email is hell.
And I write copy for my shows and stuff like that, and I can sort of do that because that's quite creative and quite interesting. But trying to write
it's a different part of the brain, isn't it? It's the same tool and the outlet, but it's a completely different process.
Trying to write sort of, and then my essays also at school. When I used to write essays, I think I used to just sort of like force my way to good marks by just writing so much. Like I would write 20 sides in an exam. I remember people always be like, "Oh my god, how much has you written this time?" Like I'm being this sort of freak, but like also quite liking the fact I was a freak. Like I was competitive about trying to write as much as possible, but I just write so much. So they're probably bad essays, but I think there was just so much in there that I used to get good marks for them. But the thought of trying to write an essay now, the thought of going back to university and I didn't enjoy it at all. I got nothing out of that. But because I had this view of myself as being academic, I kind of used to try and force myself.
So I mean, looking back, you had a few troubles at school. You're entrepreneurial. You hate forms and prefer to call people up. You're sounding pretty dyslexic.
Yeah. Maybe I am. I'm
quite more qualified actually.
Yeah. More dyslexic than I thought. But I don't know. Like I just think I would never want to use it as an excuse.
Yeah.
I just think it's so like with my lad, like he's 7. We've told him that he's autistic, and he went, "Can I call it aubistigic?" And I was like, "Yes, if you like." But and we say because he struggles with eating different new foods, and he's really struggling at school. Like he's miles behind at school. And it's that balancing act of being able to say, look, this is because this is your brain works in a way that it's contributing to these problems for you, but it is not an excuse. I think that's really important, because I think if you've got an excuse, you can just go, oh well, I can't do this, so I'm not going to try. And I think trying is the most important thing you can do. So I wouldn't ever want to use it as an excuse or claim that like I've got it so bad, because I'm hyper aware of all the privilege I've had in my life. So I'd feel more comfortable, holding my hands up to the privilege I've had than I do talking about the problems I've had. I think yeah.
And that was one of the things I was looking forward to about your story, because it is a positive story about dyslexia. It is, you had issues, but because you were in the right place and you had the right support, that those actually became positives, and actually things that have helped you to become successful.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. It's funny that we've got a word for dyslexia, haven't we? We've got a word, and we've got a whole industry around it, with its own culture. It's hard as a parent to just know how much you go, well, we have these answers, versus how much we just try and pick out his own path through life, and to hell whether he's autistic or dyslexic or all that. So we just got to kind of, it is useful. It makes you feel not alone. It makes you feel that that there's reasons for everything. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, you've got to kind of find a personal path through life that works for you.
So we've talked a lot about you and your poetry, and it's probably about time we heard some. So we're going to play out with one of your pieces of poetry. But before we do that, you've got some tours coming up and gigs and things. How can people find you?
So I'm touring a show called What I Learned from Johnny Bevan, which is a play. I play a character called Nick, but the whole thing's in verse, so it's like a long poem. Although I'd be careful about saying that; it might put people off. It's accessible and fun. So I've been doing this all year. It was in London for 3 weeks. Had a sold out run at the Soho, and we played a few other places, and now it's going another half of the tour in the autumn. So there's about 21 dates, some of which are on the website already, some of which are going to be on the website in the next couple of weeks. So I'm on tour throughout September, October and November doing this show. So catch that somewhere around the country.
And your Twitter and Facebook?
Oh, yes. So I'm on Facebook. I have no idea what my name is. I think it might be Mr. Luke Wright. And I'm Luke Wright Poet on Twitter. And this poem that we're going to play now is called Kelvin to Liverpool Street, and it's about my dad, who was a commuter, and particularly about my experiences of going up on the train with him for a couple of weeks when I was 15. And I guess it's the way we look at our parents and the way we look at ourselves through them.
For 30 years, the buzzer went at 6. He'd take your breakfast in the lonely half-light, your milky tea, your marmalade and burnt toast, its carbon whiff lingering till we rose to fill the room with Cocoa Pops and squabbles. By then, you were at your desk in Bond Street, out of sight and largely out of mind, our lives a giddy whirl of girls or pogs. It wasn't till a summer job at 15 that I observed this quiet early ritual, the briefcase and the brolly, ever cautious, among the first cars in the station car park, which I believe gave you this sort of status. A short walk to the bridge and trains to London, perpetually ahead of local bods who went to work in Colchester or Ipswich. The fat bloke who sold papers and bad coffee and greeted tourists with a sigh knew you. A brisk nod, and your telegraph appeared. He always had the right change, which he liked. Then, on the platform, "Come, Luke, we'll wait here. Best place for a good seat." You were right, and I believed, as only a son can, that you and you alone had cracked the system. But coming back at 5:30 was different. Your straight-backed morning dignity was slouched. You looked a good deal older then, as you grab fitful scraps of sleep, this slow, sad lean towards the aisle until, before you fell, some well-worn sense would jolt you back upright. Sometimes you'd snore, and I'd shoot eyeballed hatred at flash young things that raised a sarky brow. Oh, Dad. Some days you looked as if you'd walked those tracks. Although it's only now I know that this was likely why you'd snip at me. How flimsy and silly I must have seemed next to the iron protocol of trains. I vowed I'd never work that daily rut. The trains I catch provide me varied views, but when I sleep on them, I dream of you.
The Codpast is an audio production from extraordinaire.tv.
And that was this month's dose of Dyslexic Radio Heaven. As per usual, we'll be back on the first Tuesday of next month, so if you want more great interviews from the Codpast, why not set a reminder for the first Tuesday of every month? Or if you want to be a little bit more 2016 about it, subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher or SoundCloud, and as if by magic, new episodes will be beamed directly to your listening device. You can find the show notes for this episode of the Codpast and more of Luke's work by visiting our website, thecodpast.org. And while you're there, take a look at even more of our podcasts, videos and articles. This episode of the Codpast has been sponsored by dyslexic.com. Now, if you haven't already checked out our YouTube video series called Dysboxing, then you may be missing out on learning about some of the productivity boosting assistive technology that can help anyone with dyslexia or dyspraxia. If you're already in the know, then you probably know that dyslexic.com is one of the best places to get your hands on some of this assistive technology. Known for their range of products, training and support, dyslexic.com is your one-stop shop for all your assistive tech needs. Dyslexic.com have sponsored this episode of the Codpast, so why not support them and visit dyslexic.com. So to make sure you stay in the loop and know exactly when new content comes out, make sure you keep us in your timelines on Facebook and Twitter or sign up to our newsletter. But until next time, enlighten your right brain at thecodpast.org.